You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries. This is a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss character backgrounds. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and potentially parched GM colleague, Jody. Are you looking around for a drink? Is that what you're doing?
No, I was just thinking back to the good old days when I was a young lad growing up in the northern part of the state and how humble those beginnings were and how I've accomplished so much.
These intros are becoming a real stretch. Today's episode focuses on how we, both you and I, Jody, use character backgrounds in Shadowdark. Jody is now moving about the cabin. He's getting this. This is all staying in. Jody is grabbing the Shadowdark rulebook. We're doing it live, baby. We're talking about backgrounds today, and we apparently do not have a background in recording podcasts. And Jody, you are going to take us to the table with a little story about backgrounds in your game as I vamp for a little longer so you can get to the right page. Go ahead, take us away.
As many of you know, I've been running a campaign in Saltmarsh loosely in my own mashed up setting of fantasy nonsense, and we are up to 11 sessions in, which is always a good chunk of play, and I found myself wondering, why do these folks keep coming back to play? What's going on week after week? Why are they here?
Boy.
And more so, the question became, why are their characters coming back? I know why the players come back. I think they seem to be having a good time and laughed, and we roll some dice and we kill some things and we tell some stories. What's in it for their character? And I started pondering on this and thinking, you know what? Characters need stakes and skin in the game. They need something that they're passionate about. The character has to have that motivation in a campaign setting. And what I latched onto and realized is that a mechanic I've used from jump with running Shadowdark is character backgrounds, that those backgrounds on page 26 of your Shadowdark tome will list out 20 possible backgrounds for your character. And I, as does Matt, make heavy use of these during play. So I began thinking about my list of characters. As I've mentioned, I am a fan of Sly Flourishes, Lazy GM, 8 Steps that begins with, hey, think about the characters. And lo and behold, 2 of my dwarven characters have a minor background, and they are in an old abandoned mine.
I would say it's a major background.
It is now, baby. So what could I do with that? And the solution was very easy. I'm going to start playing with, dare I say the dirty word, their backstories. Oh, no. So here is the event that unfolded. The characters are descending into the Forge of Fury, and they've landed upon a glittering cavern with a fungal carpet on the ground known as the Glitterhaim, overlooking this beautiful grotto of fungus and gemstones and this interesting kind of dwarven curated English garden of an underground landscape. High above it are a series of caskets and graves. And as the party begins to examine those, some remain unfilled, unused, never, filled with tombs of ancient dwarves. So they examine them and they look over the names on the very few filled and used tombstones. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, one of them shares a last name with one of the player characters. It turns out those stories about old Uncle Istvan running off to join the crusade against the orcs may have been true after all. And not only did he run off, he ran off with a famous dwarven weaponsmith, the ancestor of one of our characters.
All right, that's just good stuff. That's good, clean fun right there. And I think right from jump, obviously, we like to make sure that we sort of give context and disclaimers. Like both you and I are very much heavily into narrative and storytelling in our games, and so this is right up my alley. It's right up your alley. This is the kind of stuff we love. So let's start here because. I was actually just reading today, at the time of recording earlier today, on the Discord, there was a bit of a back and forth about the purpose of backstories, or the purpose of backgrounds, and some of the mechanical stuff. And we can get into that, now or later. I'll let you kind of choose your own adventure here, Jody. But let's talk about backgrounds. I mean, there's a D20 table in the core rulebook. There's more in the Cursed Scrolls, and of course, GMs, what could be better than coming up with a bespoke list? You have done this for your setting, I believe. You've tweaked the core rulebook list. So talk to me about backgrounds. Like, you have really latched onto them, and you latched onto them before I did, and I kind of learned and saw you do that and was like, oh, that's quite powerful. But it's just a D20 list, and I think one of the things we don't use very much that I actually want to talk about in this episode and kind of shoehorn in is titles. I think they're very interesting, but somewhat, I don't know. But before we get there, what made you latch onto backgrounds and maybe not titles, maybe some of the other elements, maybe even deities? Because we really put those front and center before even deities, before titles.
Yeah, what jumped out to me is, I think it's safe to say that Shadowdark is a rules-light game system. Blessedly so. And when you're in a rules-light system, you grab onto what you got to make decisions. The other thing is some pushback I got from you, funny enough, of, Jody, you roll too many dice. And I went, no, I don't. And then I thought about it and said, well, maybe. And what I found was that backstories became my yes and, or my opportunity to prompt players and say, hey, what is everybody's background? Oh, you succeeded on a roll for investigating something or looking at something or asked for more clarification. Oh, well, as a fighter, I could answer that. Or actually, as a fighter, it turns out you're a sailor and you're asking about if it looks like this rope bridge would actually hold you up. Well, the sailor understands ropes and knotwork and balance points. And, as a fighter, I don't know why you'd know that, but as a sailor, you definitely could make an assessment there. And then if you got time, I'm just going to tell you, yeah, it looks pretty rickety. You're probably going to fall to your death. Or, hey, why don't you throw an intelligence test at it and we'll see if you were paying attention in rope class that day. And in this instance I gave in our example, there was the discussion of like, no, these guys had mining backgrounds. So when they got into that Glitterheim, this curated dwarven cavern, it took on a new life, and I could add a whole bunch of narrative to it. The going like, hey, you would understand both as a dwarf, which is a very normal thing players, I think a lot of fantasy GMs do, is like, as a halfling, you would see it this way. As an elf, you would see it this way. As a dwarf, you'd see it this way for your bespoke world. Well, why not if you were a surgeon or a sailor or a merchant or a cult apostate? I always love that one. Yeah. Or a scholar or whatever it was, how you would see things, and how you would approach that. And, our play group did latch onto that. And somebody who has a surgeon background goes, hey, I'm about to try and stabilize somebody who's dying. Could I have advantage on that? I mean, I'm literally a doctor effectively. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And it just became a really quick decision place to leverage mechanics and channel information to the players and give people a way to be a little bit more than just, I am an elf fighter, full stop, or I am a... Yep. It started fleshing out the world and gave new avenues for play to pursue. And it's great because, yes, there's some mechanical ways to answer these things, but it's also just a way to engage with story that makes that world feel real and lived in.
Yeah, so the thing I like about it is that they are such a great on-ramp for new players, or even players who are just new to the system, because we're all familiar with classes in some way, shape, or form. By we, I mean sort of the broader fantasy role-playing game community, right? If you played a fantasy role-playing game, you are probably familiar with the idea of a fighter, a thief, or a rogue, or et cetera, et cetera. But backgrounds, let's take 5th edition, 2014, which I'm playing right now. I actually find that and this is true of why we moved to Shadowdark, but because D&D 5th edition actually placed so much there were so many words attached to backgrounds. They became very specific. If you're a sailor, your background in D&D 2014, it means you can like get a charter or like charter a boat to something place specific. Outside of that, there's like some other components, but it ends up, because of its specificity, it ends up making it less meaningful. And it also, I think, forces players to think about their backstory and to think about their background in a very particular, narrow way. Whereas what I love about Shadowdark and what I appreciate about these backgrounds is they are one line, they're one bolded term, they're one bolded background, and then a little bit of text that kind of contextualizes it. And a lot of those give options. Maybe you were this, or maybe you were that. Right? There's or statements in there. And so what I don't know. I will say that, again, at the time of recording, the Glass Cannon podcast just had their Session 0 episode recently, which I even if you're not a fan of actual plays, I think listening to the Session 0 is great, because I think even if you don't agree with the decisions that they made and the play and the way they're taking the game, it is really interesting to be a fly on the wall for somebody else's Session 0. All that said, they took the backgrounds and boy, I mean, they like rolled their backgrounds. They actually rolled their background in the core rulebook and in the Curse Scroll and kind of decided which one was a little bit more appropriate for the character they maybe had in their head. But they took those backgrounds and they really leveraged them. Like, this is like, I am a soldier, or somebody got ranger. One of the players got ranger, and they were like, oh, maybe my priest is more like a druid. And they chose their deities kind of in line with their backgrounds. And I think that is the power of backgrounds, is that you can leverage them to whatever degree you want. But like you said, they give you some inertia behind your character in a way that classes don't. And even I would say that gods don't, because I don't know about you, Jody. This is a bit off the kind of core conceit of the episode, but like I find it hard to define my character based on a god. Because there's abstract ideas there. Do you feel the same way about like pantheons? Because for me, I have really struggled to use pantheons, and backgrounds are just so much more concrete and grounded. I feel like, I don't know.
I think that is generally true, that backgrounds are immediately accessible and concrete and understandable, and pantheons and religion, I think through a modern lens for the vast majority of players, it is hard to internalize that in a way that you can leverage it and play with it. You'll note I kept all those statements very general, and I didn't say I in any of it. I love playing with pantheons. It is a both sore spot for me, and it is a passion of mine. Like, it's a thing I wish was more prevalent in my own campaign setting. I've gone to enjoyable lengths to make sure that the pantheon is as accessible as possible to bring into the game, and still most players are not engaging with it in a real daily meaningful way. And that's okay. That's not a dig at my players or anything, but it's a way that I can grok it, and it's just not a list of funny names on a page associated with funny things. I do think it's tougher, especially in our just modern day-to-day life, to think about how does my character interact with this deity and God, because religion in our modern life is a very complicated issue in a way that is far less black and white than it was even when these games came into being. Like, in the 40 years plus that these games have existed, humans' relationship with religion has shifted tremendously conceptually. And I think that's my answer for why is it so hard to, unless you're playing a priest, to go like, oh, religion's really important to my pantheon's really important.
Even when I'm playing a priest, I find it challenging.
Yeah, I don't. No, I mean, me personally, I don't. Yeah. I was not at you, but when I was playing that priest briefly and playing with religion in our Dolmenwood game, oh my goodness, that was super fun. I loved every moment of that. And what I loved about it, and I'm going to pull back to our main topic here about this.
I legitimately, that was very,
we could do a whole episode. Unfortunately, it would not be specific. If you want to hear us talk about religion in role-playing games, let us know.
Oh, okay. Can I just
go for it.
One thing before you get us back on track, because this is interesting, and I just want to get your thoughts on one final question here, which is, so I think maybe, this is just me hypothesizing, that it is better to have generalized backgrounds like the ones in Shadowdark, and actually gods and deities that are more specific. And I don't mean, I mean like, I maybe not specific, but I mean idiosyncratic. Like, for me, the thing that makes it hard is when I get a god who's like, this is the god of light, right? And I guess maybe I'm now thinking about ways I could creatively work that into my role play or my character, but like, I guess maybe I like, or I don't know. Is it better to have general gods and general backgrounds? Is there anything there that would like maybe the specificity of the gods would be or more specificity in terms of like deities would make them easier to interact with, because there's specific stuff to hang ideas off of rather than backgrounds, which can be more broad and interpretable? I don't know. This is the last question, and then we can get back to the...
Well, the answer lies in talking to both things of backgrounds and religion or deities and pantheons. The problem is, so imagine Dolmenwood loosely in your head. Imagine
I do all the time.
I'm sure you do. Then, if you will, join me briefly in my campaign setting and what you know to be true, and imagine those two very, very different worlds. And then take us back to, 3, 4, 5 years ago when we were playing in the D&D multiverse, for lack of any...
Sure.
Okay. If I am playing a character with the background of a herbalist in any of those 3 campaign settings, I know what that means.
Yeah.
I can't say that with a pantheon. I can't say that with a deity. The deities are specifically aligned to the campaign setting. So there is an onus that comes in with a pantheon that it is bespoke and targeted on the campaign setting. If I'm playing outside of Dolmenwood, having the one true faith doesn't mean, and the old gods and the all of those things don't mean anything without the wrapping of the campaign setting. So I think it's just hard. One is a ubiquitous, understandable, immediately grabbable term, and one is setting dependent. It's frankly why I think I bounced off of the pantheon presented in Shadowdark, because Shadowdark, the core rulebook that we have as of time of recording now in physical form, there's no campaign setting there. So those gods are just law and chaos gods. They're just funny names on a page with some descriptor. So I think that's why. For me, that's why is it easy to grab onto a background and hard to grab onto a pantheon? Because the pantheon demands that you're grabbed on to the entire setting.
That is a great explanation.
And then the background is like, well, I know what it means if I'm a jeweler. Cool.
Okay.
So I want to take this background story. Yeah. Well, I just want to keep going with it. So I mentioned about that these 2 characters have backgrounds as minors, and they're in this space, and so information was revealed. On my bespoke background list for my region, because that's what I thought of, as I said, around Saltmarsh, what would be reasonable backgrounds to come in with? One of them I have that's not on the original list, that's pretty boring, frankly, is a farmer. And one of my characters, my wife's character, rolled up as a dwarven, she's using a homebrew barbarian class, rolled up, she's a farmer. Well, in my world lore, that's actually a really strange kind of combination. Not that you'd be a barbarian farmer. I mean, that is a little bit weird, but you could get there. You're outdoorsy, sure. But wait, don't dwarves and with minor backgrounds, of course, they're like dwarves in their giant ancient halls underground and blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, my fantasy goes that they've left all that and they're like a caravan people. I liked the Hobbit thing that they did in the Hobbit movies, where it showed Thorin's folk and they were on caravans and they were out being tradespeople, and that's because they don't have their mountain halls anymore. What we've learned is that the values of my wife's character Ufta, that's her dwarven fight.
It's a great name.
Yeah, is Ufta. Ufta is a very modern dwarf. Her family is very modern. They are above ground dwarves. Whereas Gravel, who is the fighter, one of the fighter miners also in the party, his dwarven character's name is Gravel, which is fun and confusing at times. Gravel has kind of taken on this life of his own, but he comes from this noble tradition of mining and that classic dwarven values. And the two of them have found this kind of meat-headed alliance together, but their backstories have developed in this really organic and interesting way through play, which is on our Discord, also getting to why in the heck are we doing this episode now, is not only what was going on at my table, but we just had this really interesting back and forth thread about backstories on our Discord. And to be fair, the spectrum was represented as you'd expect if we start talking about backstories. Do characters really, players, show up with 2-page backstories? Was asked by one of our contributors. It was like, wait, is that a real thing? I had a GM who said, before we'll play, you all have to submit 1 page of background to me. You have to write me a 1-page backstory for your character before we'll start. And this was in 3rd edition. So like, yeah, it's real. Like people do show up with 2, 3, 4-page backstories. And there are people who show up and go, I rolled up my character, man, let's just play. Yeah. In fact, the recent campaign for Critical Role, they did some like just standing talking head promo videos. And there was a call out about Marisha and Travis both submitted like a couple lines and other people wrote novelettes. And I love that one of our contributors on the Discord talked about, yeah, some backstories are pretty cringe. And then we got one really lengthy response. And there was the kind of classic also, like, man, I just kill a character if they show up with like 3 or 4 pages, which I also is not really, I have a hard time with that. But I want to call out specifically Captain Moonlight gave us a very thoughtful response that if you are on our Discord, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I really recommend giving it a read. It was posted on October 21st, and a really thoughtful argument in favor of leveraging character backstories to make a campaign, which is a very new school way of thinking about things. And I just thought it was beautifully written. And the TLDR, I guess I'll jump to the end on this, and then Matt, you can take what you want from this whole discussion, and maybe even share some of your own experience. The TLDR from Captain Moonlight is nobody comes to a fantasy game tabula rasa. Nobody comes blank slate. Everybody comes with some version of what does it mean to play a fantasy game in their head, whether they were reading, you know, back in the 70s, reading Lord of the Rings and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and Conan, or they are watching the Lord of the Rings movies today, or Game of Thrones, or they've only played Baldur's Gate, or they've only ever watched Critical Role. They are all showing up with the desire to engage with a fantasy setting. And Captain Moonlight's point is that as the GM, I want to give them that. I want to share in that excitement about playing in a fantasy setting and to some degree meeting those expectations. And their backstory is them telling me what they want to see and try and engage with that. And it's just beautifully and thoughtfully written. It is incongruous with what we often see on Discord, and even, which is better, but online posting of like, you know, a few words. I'm guilty of it. I think we all are. And I don't think I'm condoning everybody write multi-paragraph responses on those forums, but this one was particularly stood out as really well thought out. And the counter to the often posted OSR, if a character shows up with a backstory, I'm just going to kill him. And I think that's a thing Shadowdark does so right, is it gives that background transition to discover backstory through play, or roll up character, here's background. And just as you described on the actual play of Glass Cannon, oh, this has really inspired me, and now I'm going to go create some backstory. So I don't know how any of that giant rant, I now cede the soapbox.
There's a lot to tease out there, and I think you covered a lot of ground, but I also think that the thing that I took away, and I will link to this in the show notes. I'll link to the message, the post on our Discord thread in the Shadowdark Discord channel. The thing that I want to highlight is, and I'll actually read a quote here from Captain Moonlight. So, and then we'll kind of dig into it. I do, however, see and co-participate with and enjoy people who read Mistborn, watch Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and play Baldur's Gate 3. Therefore, my players are coming in not as a blank slate, but as participants who have already been informed as to what fantasy, capital F, is. But their context of information is not the same as the context for D&D and Shadowdark. My players, however, are not coming to the table to just play Shadowdark/D&D. I think this is the part that I know some folks bristle at, right? Because some people that is their expectation is. If you show up at the table, you are here to play D&D or play Shadowdark in our case. What you said was, that in this case, Captain Moonlit is articulating a point that like it's my job, and actually, here's another quote. They're coming to my table to have a unique and wonderful experience of fantasy through actualized play, and they trust me to deliver a vessel for that experience. And I think like this is one of the things we're talking about backstories, which I think we've kind of shifted away from talking about backgrounds, and now we're talking about backstories and players arriving at the table with an already preconceived notion of who their character is. I don't mind any of this. I think what you and I will agree on, and the thing that drives me a little bit bonkers, and when I push back on backstories, is number one, and this is something that I have done, is when you write a backstory that writes your character out of the story, where your character has already had a story. You wrote the story for them. They don't need to participate in the campaign. Their story is done. They have lived a more interesting life in the pages that you have given me than they will live, or than they could possibly live in a reasonable amount of time in our campaign. This is where I think the clash comes, because you and I enjoy, and I as a player have come to enjoy, the playing through the character's backstory, or at least discovering who the character is as they kind of go through their adventures. But I will say there are players who their whole enjoyment is arriving at the table knowing who their character is already. And I don't know how to square that circle. And when you have different kinds of players, when you have players at the table who want to come in with a backstory and players who want to find their character, there can be a lot of friction there that is difficult to overcome. And I don't know how to do that. I know that as a player, you kind of figure out what the energy of the table is and you allow people to be where they are. But then it becomes the GM's responsibility to really sort of figure out, how to wrestle all of those various competing desires. And man, I don't know how to do that. Like I'm not good at it. I don't really know what the best strategy is, other than, to do the session zero thing and talk it out. But like, do you have any ideas for about this? You have dealt with many more table contexts than I have, and you have played in many different styles of campaigns and many different game systems. What are your thoughts about, as a GM, corralling a table with diverse and sometimes incongruous ideas of what players should come to the table with?
I'm going to start at the most hollow generic advice ever, which is always great, of you got to talk to your players or know your players.
Right. Okay.
That's
good.
super useless. Yeah. Cool.
We got, I mean, that's important always important, but also,
but what are the criteria you need to know for this question of what does the character want from their background and their game experience? So there is a very high level, what kind of game experience do you want? For me, and the way I run, we are going to be on rails. And now I'm pretty clear with my players of hey, you are going for a ride. You will hit hubs where you will have many story options to pick from. But once you pursue a path, you're going to stay on that path for a little while until we've resolved whatever that path is. And during that, you're going to just kind of follow that arc. And we're going to play. And it's important that you build a character that's in keeping. So that play experience, if somebody is showing up with I would like to explore my character's background, I think you need to start there. Or as the GM say, hey, let's have that experience. I think number two that I look at is, are you looking at a campaign, or are you looking at a short arc, an exploratory game arc maybe? So we're going to play, you're new to Shadowdark and you're joining us and you're like, oh, I've always wondered about backgrounds and backstories. How does Shadowdark handle it? well, you're going to play Shadowdark for 3 or 4 sessions. You don't need backstories. Like, just leverage the background. That's not time well spent because you're only going to be doing something for 3 or 4 sessions. Now, when I started my Take Us to the Table, I talked about why are these players coming to play? And I said, I know why the players are coming to play because it's fun. But why are the characters invested? And if you're in a campaign, I think as a GM, there is a level of onus. Somewhere between, I can at least give your character some grounding in the world, something that your character feels some connection with in the world. And it could be just the party itself. That can take an unlimited number of forms, all the way up to what Captain Moonlight presented, which was, no, the campaign is about your backstory. If you're going to do the campaign is about your backstory, then that needs to be a lot of conversation and dialing in with the players. It's one of the comments that came up in our Discord thread of, I work with my players and go, hey, okay, you wrote about how you went and slew a dragon. You're level 1. That's really not appropriate to our campaign. So what about you have aspirations, or you've always looked up to the story of, the Green Knight who slew a dragon, and you've tried, your wish is to become that. Maybe that's a better story. Can we do that? Does that still satisfy your itch, player? And that to me is the most grounded piece of advice of how do you kind of square that circle of these competing desires for players to go, I want to have lots of backstory, I wish to have no backstory, is the discussion and knowing your players have those wants, and then going, okay, what does that look like to you? If I see a player going like, I wish I had some more to go on here, like, cool, let's talk about the campaign and what that might look like. And, there's an amount of, for me, this is very just Jody's table. I ask my players to go like, hey, let's play a few sessions and see what emerges. Like, yeah, you got ideas. Cool. Keep those ideas as ideas. And then let's see where play takes us. And then we can start putting names on things. And we can start, one of my characters he's one of our highest level characters in my campaign. He's into level 4 now. And we just figured out where he's from and what his deal is. So this Wood Elf Ranger that we've been playing, who is the player describes Silas as being an Wood Elf from Central Casting. That is his what do you need to Wood Elf from who's also not the chill, happy, friendly elf, is the judgy, cold, aloof elf. And we just had this moment come up in the campaign where we went, oh, you're from here, and that makes sense. And yeah, you are a long way from home, and why you would know about these people, but you're not one of these people. Okay, cool. This stuff's starting to click in. But I mean, we're like, this dude's played in a half a dozen sessions, and it's just now clicked into my campaign setting of like, I know how to leverage this. Cool. And that, there's an amount of trust and communication, and I am generally kind of anti-wish fulfillment as a GM. Like, it's a thing I bristle back at a little bit.
Yeah, we've had long conversations about this specific thing in particular.
And I think this is a spot I'm like, no, I think as a GM, even me as a GM who pushes back on the idea of wish fulfillment, I do feel a sense of responsibility that in time, I do owe it to both the player and the character to give them footing in the world, to give them something to latch onto. And if I'm going to do that, that has to be collaborative. And having, again, played with we'll say, less successful GM for a time that would tell you these things. This is what your character is like and what they think. That sucks. Don't do that. Full stop. You want a truth? There's a truth. Don't tell your player characters what they think and what they believe. But so that would be my advice is there's some levers and knobs. And again, much like your Pantheon question earlier, it's got to be unique to your campaign setting. And if that's an abstract idea, or you're only going to dabble with the campaign setting, at time of recording, we're going to play Blades in the Dark for the very first time.
You and I are on the exact same page.
Let her rip, because it's a perfect example of I don't care.
So, okay, I got 2 things. First of all, I am realizing I don't have very little to say about this. Usually, Jody, between the two of us, I'm the one that has very strong opinions and hot takes, and I get very disgruntled about things, and we have.
I'm gruntled.
But here's the thing is that as a new player, I had some proclivity. I didn't realize that what I was bringing to the table. I didn't realize I had baggage and all the not baggage in a bad way,
Well,
but
no, like Captain Moonlight said.
Yeah, exactly. Like I didn't know what I didn't know about in this case D&D 2014. Well, now that I am much more well versed in the wide variety of things that players are bringing to the table, the reason I asked you, like, how do you deal with this is not because I struggle with it, but because I legitimately, for me, I subscribe now to the let's play a few sessions and then let her rip, because what I see as the way to do this in Shadowdark that I think is actually a reasonable best practice if you're interested in backstory is, first of all, characters are more likely to die in Shadowdark than they are in a more heroic fantasy game, for sure, full stop. And the way there are mechanical ways to ensure that characters are more survivable, right? Max HP at first level, playing in pulp mode, it jacks that up way more. But also, like, let's see if the dice want the character to stick around. Let's see if through gameplay the character has leveled into a backstory,
is
right?
worthy.
and honestly, yeah. And I sort of, that to me is a heroic way of like, it's like you have to earn your right to have a backstory. And so I do think that there's both practical reasons for that, there's story reasons for that, and there's some just like best practice in terms of Shadowdark ways to make sure that people's feelings don't get hurt, that like, hey, let's make sure that this character is actually going to be around before we start digging into him. And then once we do, now let's actually do some work. And what I have found, I do want to talk about Blades in the Dark, but what I have found is that through the Dolmenwood game, now we have these characters that are like level 8, level 9 or whatever, and we can start like really just like cranking up to 11 the like backstory meter. Like these player characters have deep roots in the world, and I leverage it all the time, and we can do that because they're just more survivable, and now they feel like those heroic fantasy characters. And that, I think, is a great, like, that's where I feel like Shadowdark, people sell it short so often on the, well, you can't play it for long campaigns because the characters are just going to die. And it's like, no, not even close. You can do some things. Maybe you have to homebrew or house rule a couple things. But to be honest with you, not really. And guess what? You can earn your damn backstory. So all that said, I want to talk about Blades in the Dark. We're about ready to play in a couple of hours at the time of recording. We will almost certainly talk about it in an episode down the road. But what I am looking forward to in Blades in the Dark is just a highly improvisational style of play. But I think you will find, Jody, this is going to be very interesting because you know nothing about the game, really.
Yeah, very, very little.
And I have been poring over the rules, and I still feel like I'm not quite... Like, I've watched actual plays of it. I'm like, it's a much more mechanically taxing game to run than I'm used to from Shadowdark, but it mechanicalizes.
Has mechanics for.
Sure. It has mechanics for backstory. Like, literally, when you make a character, you choose a rival and an ally, and there is a list. There is a list of of names and who they are. And I think we're going to come back to this when we talk about Blades in the Dark, because it's just, I don't know. It just, to me, what I like about it is that it has a little bit of that background. They're open-ended enough. They're suggestions. They're names of NPCs and maybe like a specific thing about them, what Blades in the Dark calls a detail. But it gives you a little bit of stuff to improvise. And I don't know if that's the direction that you wanted to go with Blades in the Dark, but like it is fascinating to think about backstories and how other games have leveraged them. And I just think like backgrounds, to bring it back around to that, backgrounds are something that as a GM you can leverage, which I want to finish up our conversation by talking about how we leverage them mechanically, because this is the thing that was being discussed on the Discord. I want to ask you how you use them in your game. You already alluded to this. You gave an example earlier, but like, let's say I'm a player. Let's actually do a little bit of a role playing right now. Jody, you've set up a scene, and let's say I'm playing my dwarf wizard, who is a sailor. And let me give you an example. Actually, let's do it from the table. An example, maybe we've used this on the show before, but we were in the swamps to the north, I believe, of Saltmarsh, and very famously, we were like, okay, we need to make it up or down this river. I can't remember what.
Down. You guys had got to what you found is effectively the headwaters of a river path out of a swamp. So you'd hiked deep into this swamp and it sucked. And then you were like, oh, we could ride this river because we're at effectively the mouth of the river. Let's ride the river out. If only we had a boat.
If only we had a boat. And I said, hey, Jody, I am a sailor. Can we make a raft? And you looked at me like, okay. Dwarf, pretty handy maybe, but all and
a wizard,
pretty
intelligent,
probably well read, also a sailor. Let's throw a die at it. I think you gave me an extreme, and I was like, fair, and it was a straight roll. And I rolled a natural 20. And I think there was another natural 20 that happened when making the raft.
I think it was maybe a skill challenge or somebody was trying to support. And I was like, well, I'm going to gate a lot of this because this is a very tall ask on the players that in the middle of a dank old swamp, we can cobble together a functional raft.
And we did. And it was
not only did, but yeah.
So long story short, what I appreciated about that is that you opened a gate. You allowed for a scene to take place. However, you didn't just give it to us, which sometimes you do. So talk to me about how you interpret backstories. About how you interpret backgrounds and a character's backstory, and how you kind of imbue it or imbue mechanics, or take that and use it to inform your mechanical calls for roles or doling out of information.
This is something I'm very much working on in my own GMing practice. I gave you a little grief earlier about Matt gives me a hard time about you roll too much or you call for too many rolls. And
I did at one point. You've gotten better, Jody. You are learning.
Well, I'm working on it. I aspire to someday just not need dice anymore, because isn't that the goal?
Oh, you
salty boy.
No.
So the point to answering your very reasonable question that I turned into an unfair jab is that what I'm trying to do is think in terms of, if somebody asked me a question about their background and would they know, changing my mindset to let's roll for it to can I say yes to this? And if I find myself really hesitant to say yes, then it's okay. It's a normal DC, whatever seems appropriate skill check, because that's a skill check. And I'll usually tell the players in the moment, like, this is pretty out there. So I'm going to make it a normal skill check, and I'll, make me an intelligence check at a 12. And, we'll see if that is reasonable or not. Cause I don't know. I don't know, but trying to leverage it to say yes. I think the phrase that comes to mind for me a lot when I'm trying to make those mechanical decisions is the kind of, do you have time? Are you under threat? Do you have, a talent here? Well, your background says you have a talent for it, or a skill. You are trained in it. Training, that's the other T. And so I'm trying to keep that in the back of my mind of, well, if the answer could be yes under those criteria, well, then just make the answer yes. Unless it, again, I get that little internal alarm of like, man, this is feeling kind of nonsensy. And I'd say the raft is a great example of that, of like, yes, you know how, you don't have the resources, and this is a tough one. So no, I need a roll here. This one I'm going to need you to roll for.
And I think, the fact you basically gave me the longest possible odds without giving me disadvantage. And and so that felt totally fair.
Right. It was a tough situation. And then, that raft has become a beloved character in the story.
Indeed it has.
I think one of the things, though, I also like to lean on is one of the famous tenets of the OSR. And I want to caution folks that as I keep referencing OSR things, I also I've said it on the show before, and I'll keep saying it on the show. I don't know that I actually think Shadowdark is truly an OSR game.
Oh God, we're going to have this conversation.
And we are a little bit. And I will say more confidently, I don't think I'm an OSR GM, which I think is funny because I run almost exclusively genuinely first edition old school modules or with a high regularity. So I'm like, but per the definitions of what OSR is, many of those modules don't meet those definitions. And one of the definitions that shows up around OSR is the answer's not on your character sheet, right? You don't go look into your character sheet for answers. Shadowdark kind of has a counter argument to that. It's called your background, because it often is a really fun way to come up with an answer. But OSR also goes, but leverage the environment. Well, as a player, how do I know how to leverage the environment? Well, if I am a jeweler, the way I leverage the environment is very different than if I'm a minstrel or I'm a scout. Those background bits that I can leverage from my sheet inform that decision making as a player, and I as the GM want to honor that. Now, as a GM, I could entirely ignore that and not make use of it at all, but that's not how I roll.
Yeah, and I mean the Shadowdark core rules are a little vague in terms of what backgrounds are supposed to be. They're supposed to give you an advantage potentially, right? So there's some language in there that's a little bit vague, and obviously, like so many other things, that vague language allows for GMs to interpret it how they would like. I'm going to push back on you about this OSR thing, because here's the thing. I think the OSR, like we talked about in our last episode, is full of it contains multitudes, and it is somewhat hilariously hypocritical in its like if you read the Principia Apocrypha and some of the other, I think Matt Finch's primer in old school gaming there it is. The mileage we got out of Primer. I think his sort of his primer on old school gaming is quite good, and also I think the better of the two kind of seminal works on OSR and old school play. But if you read them and then you try and apply them to the game, I think what you realize is like a lot of that OSR stuff, like the answer isn't on your sheet, those are more just sort of pithy maxims than they are actual real life sort of, I don't know, dogma, right? So to me, what I get out of the answer isn't on your sheet is there's not a mechanical button that you can push, but what I see as very OSR is using the words on your sheet and looking up from your sheet and looking at your GM and saying, hey, I am a blank. What you have described in this scene is X, Y, and Z. Would I be better at engaging with X because I am a jeweler? For instance, if I'm a jeweler, maybe I have some jeweler's tools on me. Maybe I just happen to have, some kind of small rudimentary tools. I know you said that this lock was a DC 18. It's extreme. Perhaps because I'm a jeweler and I maybe have some tools on me, would I be able to bring the DC down to a DC 15 and use my dexterity to attempt to pick this lock? And I think those are the kinds of conversations I want to have with players. That answer is not on your sheet. That answer just was created by the player and be created by their creativity. And I think for me, that's, if I can just share how I do, that's what I want. And the real sort of secret, the behind the quote unquote behind the screen secret here is that if a player is willing to engage with the world in a meaningful way by leveraging their background, I want to reward that. My main goal as a GM is to be sort of behaviorist, right? Like if you're playing the game in the way that we have all agreed it quote unquote should be played at our table, meaning creativity, grounding your character in the realism of our shared world, which I know is sometimes hard in Dolmenwood, but I think now we have a shared reality of
absolutely.
Dolmenwood.
Undeniably.
Right? And there's some stuff that would be ridiculous to try, even though there's tons of ridiculous stuff in the world. Like if players are doing their part and bringing themselves and their characters to life in the space of imagination, then I want to leverage that and I want to reward it in a way that makes sense and has the correct stakes for the kind of story we're trying to tell. But like, you know, I'm not just going to let them pick the lock in this case, but maybe I will bring the DC down. The long and short of it is that there is a way to train your players to play in a more OSR way by leveraging specifically backgrounds that I have found is not the case when leveraging class, when leveraging, you know, spells, when leveraging so much else about Shadowdark. Backgrounds are the way that I have seen players connect with OSR principles in meaningful ways that I haven't seen anywhere else. So I don't know, man. That is, to me, backgrounds are such a powerful tool. It's a bummer it took us like 54 episodes to talk about them, but we've talked about them in the past. But like, I don't know. I see them as being super valuable. So any sort of you're open to the title page, not the title page, but the page about titles. Why do you think this isn't true about titles for us? Because this was discussed on the Discord as well recently, and there were a lot of people who had some really cool ideas for how to use titles. And I just want to get your thoughts about why didn't we really jump at titles? Because they seem to have some similar qualities to them.
So when you were asking about pantheons and specificity versus open-endedness and those sorts of things, the titles are fun, but even as a player, I can think of one time ever I leveraged my title, and it was because I was playing a religious character, and I went, oh, literally my level title as a lawful priest is I am an acolyte, and said, I'm going to go talk to this NPC and present myself as an acolyte of the one true faith. And that was it. That was the whole, like, I am going to lean into my title. So my thoughts on why don't I latch on to them? They're a moving target. They change. So every couple levels you have a new one to be aware of. So that's hard as a GM as GMs who run for mixed level groups. We're not leveling up everybody up at the same pace. So we're not like, oh, your titles have all changed. Everybody, hey, you've made level 3 this week. Everybody update your title, which would help. Like that would make it more accessible. But I mean, we have folks who in our Dolmenwood game who are like, I'm level 5, but I got somebody sitting to my right who's functionally level 10, but they're actually split class. Ooh, drama. But they're split class, so they're like level 7.
We won't be doing
we have not found the answer yet.
It turns out that the only way multi-classing works in Shadowdark is if your characters don't, or your players don't care about how powerful their characters are.
Thankfully, that's worked out for Hilda. Like she doesn't care.
Yeah. So there's my review of multi-classing. Play with players who don't really care about how powerful their characters are.
So it's a moving target. That's the really punchline on the titles, character titles, why I don't use them. I mean, I'm going to say this. I don't use them to the point that on my self-made character sheets, I take that line off the sheet.
Yeah.
Because it's just a moving target. In thinking about it from can I give anybody advice about titles? And I want to go find that thread and give it a look through now. Mine is, it does indicate a power level for the player of how do you engage with the world. So just taking it from that priest one, I'm an acolyte, I'm a crusader, I'm a Templar. There's an indication there to the GM of how the world should be treating a character of that level. Like the way the world is going to treat an acolyte of the god of Tuesday afternoons is very different than the way that they're going to treat a paladin of Tuesday afternoons, right? Like whatever they happen to worship. I don't know why it's Tuesday afternoons, but it is.
I don't think anybody worships a Tuesday afternoon.
Well, they're not a very popular church. That's why we've never heard of them before. It's very secret. But yeah, for me, it's weird that there's too many. And like, so what and it's like, and because it's changing and it's too many, again, it goes back to that. Oh, it's your background. You're part of the Thieves Guild. Claps and wipes hands. Got it. I know what that means. Here we go forever. and you will always.
Here we go forever.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you live long enough.
I was going to say,
if you live.
Okay, so let me bounce one idea off you here, and then we'll get out of here. The idea that was proffered on the Discord, I think this was a part of it. I'll go dig up the thread if I can find it. Was essentially that it was a quest. It was a long-term project, essentially, where if you wanted to get entry into, I think this was like a wizard who was attempting to get entry into some very esteemed wizarding school, that you had to achieve a particular title. That just means you have to be a particular level. It's just a level gate. But what the person was essentially saying was that they created an in-world representation of something that was a very meta mechanic, right? Level. And this is how OD&D worked, and
they had these.
The titles were, the Myrmidon being one of my personal favorite ways to describe, I think, a fighter, right? I heard that and I thought, oh, there are some ways to do this, and there were lots of different ways that people talked about having, their world interact with their characters' titles. But I do think that fundamentally and functionally, they are just less. They're less bang for your buck than backgrounds for sure. But I would like to try and leverage them more in future campaigns. And I would love to have a campaign that is sort of about your title. Especially, I have been wanting to run a campaign, Jody. This is just kind of, I may cut this, but I've been wanting to run a campaign with all of the same class, specifically like an all fighters campaign that is based around like the military. So I don't know. There's ideas that I've been kind of milling about in my head, mulling over, I guess is a better term. But I don't know. So that's where I'm at. I think at this point, let's hear from a sponsor, and then we'll come back and we will close out the show. Are you an aspiring architect of doom? Have you ever wanted to build your perfect dungeon, but found yourself tangled up in complex designs, confusing traps, and bureaucracy? Well, fear no more, because Square Spaces help you create the perfect dungeon easier than casting magic missile. And Squarespaces is releasing a new feature right now where they help you file all of your paperwork. That's right. Squarespaces will help you deal with the permitting process, whether you're dealing with the College of Physics and Sorcerers, the Saltmarsh Town Council, the Council of Elevated Brewers, or just trying to get a dock permit from the Fishing Guild. Whatever you need, Squarespaces now has the staff, the know-how, and the greased palms to get it done. With their intuitive drag-and-drop interface, you can easily add secret doors, trap-filled hallways, and treasure chests that may or may not explode upon opening, and so much more. But now, you can design above-ground features as well. That's right. You can design towers, dungeons, taverns, you name it. Just pick your tiles, set your traps, decide whether your doors are shut, locked, stuck, or just plain illusory. Your dungeons or any space, as long as it's square, is ready for adventurers to scream in joy or terror. Right now, you can get a free trial by using DMD for 10% off your first custom dungeon, tavern, or any Square space you can imagine. Squarespaces, the easiest way to create a Square space. All right, Jody, let us bring this topic into the light with our core takeaways. What do you got?
My top one, backstory. Ugh. You know what? Either way, what we're talking about here and why the background mechanic is so powerful is give your players and their characters some narrative places to hang their hat in the world. Give them a sense of who they are. It lets you get into that grounded, shared imagination space that no matter whether you are as OSR, as Gygax, or as new school as Mercer, that shared imagination space is what we're all aiming for and always have been, and God's willing always will be.
Oh, that was nicely done.
Thanks.
My first of two takeaways is I mean, sort of just patting myself on the back here, but I do think that it's that rewarding your players for engaging with the world is, especially if they are not used to OSR style games and or using OSR principles, to backgrounds is such an easy way in, and to reward that with either a roll or just, yeah, you know what? You do know what those runes mean. You're a wizard and you are a wizard's apprentice. That sounds to me like you know what you're talking about and what you're seeing.
100%. And in that regard, I do want to clarify, as I railed against perhaps OSR there, I do agree with that 100%. That is what the ideal values are of, no, engage with the fantasy. There isn't a scripted feat. There's a just what do you want to do, man? Just describe it. And I think that's rad. GMs, I'm going to kick it back to you here for my last takeaway. What is your campaign setting? What is this world you play in? Is it Dolmenwood and It's a Dark, Wonderful Fantasy? Is it classic Lord of the Rings inspired fantasy genre garbage? That's my jam. What's yours? Are you in Eberron? Where are you? Because the background mechanic is how your players can really start to see that thing come to life. So know your campaign and then make those backgrounds come to life in yours.
Love that. And last but not least, just a reminder to not yuck other people's yums. Backstories are one of those places where we unfortunately see a ton of negativity. And they are one of those things that's lampooned, skewered, and made fun of. The 2-page backstory is a meme. And I think it is to the detriment of all of us when we denigrate things like that are very real and that players do get enjoyment out of. Those players might not be right for your table, and that's fine. But I think that we should be more welcoming, especially in spaces that qualify themselves as OSR. Because in my opinion, expanding what the OSR is just a little bit to include more people, I don't know. I don't think that's a bad thing.
And as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you're able to find something useful in this episode you can take into one of your future games. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod, all one word, @gmail.com. You can also reach out via YouTube or Facebook, or best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel, and then we can talk about you on the show. You can find links to those feeds and any other materials we referenced in this show's episode show notes. Until next time, just think about the past, man. Where do you come from?
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.
Aren't we all just merchants, man? Just looking to make our way.
Some strange late stage capitalism nonsense. Get that crap out of here.